The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Ashford estate, crystal fragments catching the light like fallen stars. I stared at the mess I'd made, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of what I'd just discovered. 3 weeks. 3 weeks I'd been living this lie, pretending to be someone else, falling deeper into a world that wasn't mine. And now, standing in Owen's study, with my real passport clutched in my shaking fingers, I knew it was over. "Stella?" Owen's voice cut through my panic. He stood in the doorway, his green eyes taking in the broken glass, my pale face, the documents, scattered across his mahogany desk. "What's wrong?" "Everything," I wanted to scream. "Everything is wrong, and it's all my fault. But let me tell you how this all began, because the ending makes no sense without understanding how perfectly my life fell apart that rainy afternoon at JFK Airport. The storm had been merciless. Rain hammered the terminal windows while I stood. At the airline counter, my destroyed suitcase leaking water onto the pristine floor. My passport was illegible, my wallet had turned to soup, and my credit cards looked like they'd been put through a blender. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without proper documentation, I can't help you," the airline employee said for the third time, her smile as brittle as old paper. I stared at the wreckage of my life spread across the counter. 3 months in London as an exchange student, working at a tiny art gallery, surviving on instant noodles and dreams. Now I couldn't even prove who I was. But I need to get back to Detroit. My flight leaves in 2 hours. The panic was rising in my throat like bile. Stella Thompson. The voice was deep, British, and completely unexpected. I spun around, nearly knocking over a pile of soggy forms. A tall man in an impeccable suit stood behind me, his appearance screaming old money and authority. His blue eyes assessed me from head to toe, and I could see in his expression that I was failing whatever test he was conducting. "Yes," I replied, more from reflex than certainty. He sighed as if preparing for an unpleasant task. "I'm Marcus. Mr. Ashford's driver? He sent me to pick you up," my brain stuttered. "There must be some mistake. I don't know any Mr. Ashford." Marcus frowned, consulting his phone. "Stella Thompson. Flight from London. Arrival scheduled for 3:30 p.m. Aren't you Mr. Owen Ashford's fiancée?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Fiancée. The only remotely romantic thing in my life was a plant named Rodrigo that was probably dead in my Detroit apartment by now. A loud announcement crackled through the speakers, informing everyone that all flights to Detroit had been canceled due to weather conditions. I felt my world collapse completely. No documents, no money, no flight, and now a stranger confusing me with someone's fiancé. Marcus watched me with a mixture of impatience and pity. "Miss Thompson, Mr. Ashford is waiting. He doesn't like delays." I looked around the chaos of the airport, people sleeping on floors, enormous lines at every counter, the storm outside, growing worse by the minute. My options were spending the night here like a well-dressed homeless person, or lying. "How long until he discovers I'm not who you think I am?" I asked, more to myself than to Marcus. "Pardon? Nothing?" My face burned with embarrassment and desperation. "It's just that I'm not very presentable to meet Mr. Ashford." Marcus gave an almost imperceptible smile. "The gentleman is accustomed to setbacks, shall we?" I looked one last time at the airline employee who had already moved on to the next desperate passenger. My entire life had been a sequence of small disasters that somehow worked out in the end. Maybe this time would be no different. "All right," I said, picking up the soggy remains of my luggage. "But only until I can sort out my situation." Outside, a black limousine waited in the rain, like something out of a movie. Marcus opened the door, and for a moment I hesitated. Once I got into that car, there would be no going back. I would officially be pretending to be someone I wasn't. "Stella, any problem?" Marcus asked, noticing my hesitation. "No, just processing." "Everything," I lied, sliding into the most luxurious car I'd ever seen. As the limousine glided through New York's wet streets, I gripped the leather seat and tried to imagine what kind of person this Owen Ashford was. If I had known that in 3 weeks I would be in love with a man who didn't even know my real name, maybe I would have run back to the airport. But then again, I was always terrible at making sensible decisions. The Ashford estate wasn't just a house. It was a monument to wealth so old it had calcified into something almost mythical. As the limousine wound through iron gates and up the circular driveway, I pressed my face against the window like a child. At a candy store, manicured lawns stretched toward the horizon, interrupted by fountains that probably cost more than most people's houses. The mansion itself looked like it had been transplanted from a fairy tale, all stone towers and arched windows that caught the dying light. "First time at the estate?" Marcus asked, catching my wide-eyed expression in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," I mumbled, trying to smooth my disaster of hair while simultaneously attempting to look like someone who belonged in a place like this. Epic fail on both counts. The car stopped in front of massive oak doors that screamed, "Old money." Marcus came around to open my door, and I stepped out, clutching my pathetic bundle of soggy belongings, feeling like a drowned rat who'd wandered into Buckingham Palace. "Mr. Ashford is waiting in his study," Marcus said, leading me up marble steps that were probably worth more than my college education. "He's been anxious about your arrival." "Anxious? Great. Nothing like meeting your fake fiancé when he was already stressed about your existence." The interior was even more overwhelming than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they made me dizzy. Oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors glared down disapprovingly, and Persian rugs that belonged in museums covered gleaming hardwood floors. Marcus stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and knocked twice. "Come in," came a voice from inside. Deep, slightly irritated, and unmistakably American despite Marcus's British accent. Marcus opened the door and gestured for me to enter. "Sir, Miss Thompson has arrived." I stepped into what could only be described as a book lover's paradise. Two ceiling shelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound volumes that probably contained the secrets of the universe. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it sat Owen Ashford. Holy hell, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled "Billionaires Who Could Destroy Your Life and Look Good Doing It." Dark hair that was perfectly tousled in that way that probably took an hour to achieve. Sharp jawline and green eyes that seemed to see right through whatever facade you were trying to maintain. He wore a simple white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, but somehow made casual look like it cost a fortune. He looked up from whatever he was reading, and I watched his expression shift from mild curiosity to confusion to what might have been disappointment. "You're not what I expected," he said finally, setting down his pen and leaning back in his chair. "I get that a lot," I replied before I could stop myself, then immediately wanted to disappear into the Persian rug beneath my feet. I mean, the flight was rough. Then there was the storm and my luggage. I held up the soggy remains of my belongings as evidence, realizing too late that this probably wasn't helping my case. Owen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't sound British." My heart stopped. Of course. The real Stella Thompson was supposed to be from London. I'd just spent 3 months there, but my Detroit accent was about as British as a hamburger. "I spent a lot of time in America as a child," I said, hoping I sounded more convincing than I felt. "It tends to come out when I'm nervous." "You nervous?" He stood up, and I realized he was even taller than I'd thought. He moved around the desk with fluid grace and walked toward me slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Wouldn't you be?" I shot back, then immediately regretted. The defensive tone? I mean, this is all very overwhelming. He stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and masculine that made my brain temporarily forget how to form coherent thoughts. "My grandmother's letters?" "Made you sound different," he said, studying my face with an intensity that made me want to hide behind the nearest bookshelf. "Different how?" I asked, genuinely curious about this woman I was supposed to be. More refined, less he gestured vaguely at my bedraggled appearance. "Disaster-prone?" I suggested helpfully. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward, but it was gone so fast I might have imagined it. "I was going to say authentic," he said quietly. "The women in my social circle are many things, but authentic isn't usually one of them." There was something in his voice, a weariness that made me forget for a moment that I was supposed to be playing a role That sounds lonely. He looked surprised by my response, as if no one had ever acknowledged that before. I've grown accustomed to it. That doesn't mean you have to like it, I said softly. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Something warm and unexpected and absolutely terrifying given the circumstances. Marcus mentioned you lost your luggage, Owen said finally. Breaking the spell, lost is a generous term. Destroyed would be more accurate. I held up what remained of my poor suitcase, along with my passport, wallet, and any evidence that I'm a functioning adult. We'll get you new documents. In the meantime, Mrs. Patterson has prepared the guest suite for you. She's also arranged for some appropriate clothing to be delivered. Appropriate clothing? I repeated, looking down at my wrinkled, damp outfit. For dinner. We're expected at the Harringtons tomorrow evening. It's important for business. Because I was supposed to be his fiancée, the one who would make appearances at fancy dinner parties and smile prettily while discussing whatever it was that billionaires talked about. Of course, I said, trying to sound like someone who regularly attended dinner parties that required appropriate clothing. Owen was watching me again with that penetrating stare. Are you feeling all right? You seem unsettled?
Us.
Unsettled was one way to put it. Completely out of my depth and falling deeper into a lie with every passing second was more accurate. Just tired, I said. It's been a very long day. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Mrs. Patterson will show you too? Your room will discuss the details of our arrangement tomorrow. Arrangement, right? Because this was all business to him. A marriage arranged by his grandmother to someone he'd never met. The thought should have been reassuring. It meant he had no emotional investment in the real Stella Thompson. Instead, it made me inexplicably sad. Of course, I said again. Because apparently, my vocabulary had shrunk to 2 words. Owen walked back to his desk and picked up his pen, effectively dismissing me. But just as I reached the door, he called my name. Stella. Turned back, my heart doing something acrobatic. In my chest, at the way my name sounded in his voice, welcome home, he said. For a crazy moment, I almost believed that's what this was. The sapphire dress arrived at dawn, carried in by Mrs. Patterson, like it was made of spun moonlight. It probably cost more than I'd made in my entire 3 months in London, and when I slipped it on, I barely recognized the woman staring back. At me in the mirror? You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, adjusting the delicate straps. Mr. Ashford will be pleased. I studied my reflection, trying to see what she saw. The woman in the mirror looked elegant, refined, like she belonged in this world of crystal chandeliers and Persian rugs. But underneath the silk and carefully applied makeup, I was still just me, still lying about everything that mattered. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, what was she like, the real Stella Thompson? The housekeeper's hands stilled on my shoulders. What do you mean, dear? I mean, what did Owen expect? From his grandmother's letters? She smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression. Miss Eleanor always spoke of you as spirited, independent, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by wealth or status. She paused, meeting my eyes in the mirror. I think you're exactly what she described, if only she knew how right she was. And for all the wrong reasons, an hour later, I was sitting in the back of Owen's Bentley, trying not to wrinkle the dress or hyperventilate. Owen sat beside me, devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, scrolling through messages. On his phone? Nervous? He asked without looking up. Should I be? This time he did look at me and something flickered in his green eyes. The Harringtons are old family friends. Charles has been trying to convince me to invest in his latest venture for months. Having you there tonight as my fiancé will help seal the deal. The word fiancé still made my stomach flip. And after tonight? After tonight, we'll need to discuss our timeline. The wedding, the media announcements, all the details that come with, he gestured vaguely between us. With fake engagements? I asked before I could stop myself. Owen's phone clattered to the floor. What did you say? My heart hammered against my ribs. I just meant with arranged engagements, business arrangements. I know this isn't exactly a love match. His eyes searched my face for a long moment. No, he said finally, it's not. but there was something in his voice that made me wonder if he wished it were different. The Harrington estate was smaller than Owen's, but no less impressive. We were ushered into a drawing room filled with New York's elite, all diamonds and designer gowns, and conversations about things I'd only read about in magazines. Owen, a silver-haired man, approached us with arms outstretched. "And this must be the famous Stella," Owen replied, his hand settling on the small of my back. The touch sent electricity racing up my spine. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée." I smiled and extended my hand, trying to channel every period drama I'd ever watched. "Mr. Harrington, it's lovely to meet you." "Charming," Charles said, but his eyes were calculating.
Me, my dear.
"What do you think of Owen's latest acquisition? The art gallery in Soho?" I felt Owen tense beside me. Clearly, this was some kind of test. I think I said carefully that art should be accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford to collect it. Charles laughed. How refreshingly idealistic. "And what's your background in art, if you don't mind me asking?" This was dangerous territory. The real Stella Thompson might have had a completely different background. "I spent some time working in galleries in London," I said, which was technically true. Small ones, mostly. "I believe you learn more about art when you're close to struggling artists than when you're simply writing checks." Owen's hand pressed more firmly against my back, and when I glanced at him, there was something like pride in his expression. "Fascinating perspective," Charles said. "Owen, you've found yourself quite a treasure." The evening continued in a blur of introductions and small talk. I found myself falling into the role more easily than I'd expected, partly because Owen never left my side. His presence was both comforting and devastating. Every casual touch, every time he introduced me as his fiancée, drove the knife of guilt deeper into my chest. But it was during dinner, when the conversation turned to childhood memories, that everything almost fell apart. "Stella, darling," said Victoria Harrington, Charles's wife, Owen, "was just telling us about your grandmother's estate in the Cotswolds. You must have such wonderful memories of visiting there as a child." I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd never been to the Cotswolds. I'd barely been anywhere outside of Detroit before my London exchange program. I began, but Owen's voice cut through my panic. "Stella doesn't like to talk about her grandmother," he said smoothly. "They were very close. Lena's death last year was particularly difficult." Victoria's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Owen had just saved me from complete exposure, but at what cost? He'd built on my lie, made it bigger and more complex. No, I wasn't just pretending to be Stella Thompson. I was pretending to be an orphan. The drive home was silent except for the whisper of tires on asphalt. Owen stared out his window, his jaw tight with tension I couldn't read. "Thank you," I said finally, "for covering for me back there." "You were terrified," he said, without looking at me. "I could see it in your eyes. I'm not used to this world. All the expectations, the scrutiny." "No," he said, finally turning to face me. "You're not, but you handled yourself well tonight." Charles was impressed. "Does that mean the deal is secured?" "It means he trusts my judgment, in business and in personal matters." We pulled through the gates of the estate, and I felt a strange sense of coming home that had nothing to do with the grand house and everything to do with the man sitting beside me. "Stella," Owen said as Marcus opened my door, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart stopped. Did he know? Had I given myself away? "Tomorrow, we'll need to go into the city to get your replacement documents and to visit my jeweler." "Your jeweler? For your engagement ring?" he said quietly. "We can't keep attending events without one. People will notice." An engagement ring. Another layer to this elaborate deception. Another piece of evidence of a love that didn't exist. "Of course," I whispered. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my borrowed room and my borrowed life, I wondered if the love part was entirely true. Because when Owen had called me his fiancé tonight, when he'd placed his hand on my back and looked at me like I was something precious, it hadn't felt like pretending. And that terrified me more than any lie I'd ever told. The emerald caught the morning light like captured fire, throwing green shadows across the velvet-lined case. It was easily the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and easily the most terrifying symbol of how deep I'd fallen into this deception. "It was my grandmother's," Owen said quietly, watching my face for a reaction. "She wanted Stella to have it." I stared at the ring, my hands trembling. Eleanor Ashford had chosen this for her grandson's bride, for a woman she'd corresponded with through letters, a woman she'd never met, but had grown to love through carefully crafted words on paper. A woman who wasn't me. It's perfect, I whispered, and meant it. Owen lifted the ring from its case, his fingers brushing mine as he slipped it onto my finger. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm, and when I looked up, I found him watching me, with an expression I couldn't read. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like a lie. It's like a promise I could never keep. Like the most beautiful trap I'd ever fallen into." "Like it belongs," I said instead. We were standing in his private office, morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and for a moment, the world felt suspended between truth and fiction. Owen's thumb traced the ring on my finger, and I wondered if he could feel my pulse hammering beneath my skin. "There's something else," he said, not moving away. "The charity gala next week. It's the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there, including several business associates I've been courting for months." "Another performance," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "More than that." His green eyes met mine. "It's where we'll announce our engagement officially. The ring, the announcement, everything will be public after that night. Public." Word hit me like a physical blow. Up until now, this had been a private deception contained within Owen's social circle. But once we made it public, once it was in newspapers and society magazines, there would be no taking it back. "Stella." Owen's voice was concerned. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just thinking about everything that needs to be done. Mrs. Patterson has already contacted the designers. Your gown will be ready by Thursday. I've arranged for a stylist to come in Friday morning." A gown, a stylist, an official announcement that would make me Stella Thompson forever, or until the truth destroyed everything. "Oh," and I said carefully, "what happens after?" "After the announcement, after we're officially engaged, what's the timeline for the actual wedding?" His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I haven't discussed that yet." "But your grandmother's will required that I'd be engaged within 6 months of her death and married within a year." We stepped back, putting distance between us. "We have time. It's time." As if time could somehow resolve the fundamental problem, that I was living someone else's life. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. The gown arrived, a vision in midnight blue silk that made me look like someone who belonged in Owen's world. The stylist, a tiny woman named Francesca, worked magic with my hair and makeup. But underneath all the beautiful trappings, the guilt was eating me alive. I'd started having dreams about the real Stella Thompson. She haunted my nights, appearing sometimes as an elegant woman in vintage clothes, sometimes as a ghostly figure pointing accusingly at my left hand, where Eleanor's ring glittered like a judgment. The morning of the gala, I woke to find Mrs. E. Patterson in my room, not with breakfast, but with a small wrapped package. "This arrived by special courier," she said, her expression troubled. "It's addressed to Miss Thompson." The package was small, official-looking, with a return address I didn't recognize. With shaking fingers, I unwrapped it to find a new British passport and a note written in elegant handwriting. "Stella, darling, I hope this reaches you in time. I'm so sorry for the delay in sending your replacement documents. The bureaucracy here is worse than ever. I've also enclosed the photographs from grandmother's funeral that you requested. Give my love to Owen. All my best. Margaret." The passport fell from my numb fingers. Inside the front cover was a photograph of a woman who looked nothing like me. Nothing. Stella Thompson had dark hair, brown eyes, and delicate features that spoke of old English breeding. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the face of the woman I was supposed to be. It's the woman whose life I'd stolen, whose fiancé I'd been falling in love with, whose engagement ring I wore like a brand of my deception. Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you feeling unwell?" I looked up at her kind face, and the words almost tumbled out. The truth, finally, after weeks of living this elaborate lie. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Owen's voice calling my name, and I knew I couldn't do it, not today. Not when he needed me to play the perfect fiancé one more time. "I'm fine," I said, stuffing the passport and photographs back into the package. Just pre-gala nerves, but I wasn't fine. As I got dressed that evening, as Owen fastened a diamond necklace around my throat as we rode to the Plaza Hotel in silence, I felt like I was preparing for my own execution. The ballroom was a fairyland of crystal and candlelight. New York's elite mingled beneath chandeliers that threw rainbow prisms across the dance floor. Owen was magnificent in his tuxedo, commanding attention without even trying, and when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that made my chest ache. "You're beautiful," he said. For a moment I forgot about the passport hidden in my room, forgot about the real Stella Thompson, forgot about everything except the way he was looking at me. "Oh," and I began, but he was already guiding me toward the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles Harrington's voice boomed over the crowd. If I could have your attention for a moment, this was it. The moment that would make everything irreversibly real. Owen's arm tightened around my waist. "Are you ready?" He whispered. No, I would never be ready. But I nodded anyway. "It is my great pleasure," Charles continued, "to announce the engagement of my dear friend Owen Ashford to the lovely Stella Thompson." "Owen, Stella, congratulations." The crowd erupted in applause. Champagne glasses clinked. A photographer appeared, snapping pictures that would be in tomorrow's society pages. Owen's lips brushed my temple, and cameras flashed again. "There's no going back now," he murmured against my ear. But I was already gone. Lost in the web of lies I'd woven, trapped by my own deception and the terrible truth that somewhere along the way, I'd fallen completely, hopelessly in love with a man who didn't even know my real name. The real question was what I would do when he found out. I found Owen in his study at 3 a.m, staring out at the grounds with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He'd removed his bow tie, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, but he still looked every inch the billionaire who'd commanded. "That ballroom earlier tonight, couldn't sleep either?" he asked without turning around. I stood in the doorway, clutching the British passport and the photographs that would end everything. "We need to talk. This is about the announcement, about making everything official. I understand if you need time to adjust. This world can be overwhelming. Owen, please look at me." He turned, and I saw something in his expression that made my heart crack. Vulnerability. Hope. Something that looked dangerously like love. "I have something to tell you," I said, stepping into the room. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." He set down his glass and moved toward me. "Stella, whatever it is, we can work through it. Tonight, when I saw you in that ballroom, when we announced our engagement, I realized something." He reached for my hands. "This doesn't have to be just business anymore. What I feel for you, what we have, it's real." The words hit me like physical blows. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. Wasn't just tolerating me for the sake of his grandmother's will. He'd fallen for me too. "Owen, stop." I pulled my hands away. "You don't understand. This whole thing, this entire relationship, it's built on a lie." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I held out the passport with shaking hands. "I'm not Stella Thompson." He stared at the document, confusion clouding his features. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not her. Not your fiancée. Not the woman your grandmother chose for you. I'm just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I let Marcus believe I was someone I wasn't because I was desperate and scared and had nowhere else to go." Owen took the passport, his face going white as he opened it, and saw the photograph of the real Stella Thompson. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Who are you?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Emma Hayes. I'm from Detroit. Was an exchange student in London, working at a tiny gallery, and I was trying to get home when the storm hit. When Marcus found me at the airport, I should have corrected him immediately. But I didn't, and then one lie led to another, and before I knew it, I was living in your house, wearing your grandmother's ring, falling in love with you." He staggered backward as if I'd struck him. "Falling in love with me?" That's the worst part, I said, tears streaming down my face. None of this was supposed to be real, but somewhere between that first night and tonight, I fell completely, stupidly in love with you. And I knew that when you found out who I really was, you'd hate me for it. Owen sank into the chair behind his desk, still staring at the passport. Emma Hayes, he said, testing my real name. All this time you've been lying to me about everything, not about everything. And my feelings for you, those were real. The way I felt when you touched me, when you called me beautiful, when you looked at me like I was something precious, that was all real. But your name isn't real. Your past isn't real. The woman I thought I was falling in love with doesn't exist. Words cut deeper than I'd expected. She does exist. I exist. I'm just not who you thought I was. You're not who I thought you were, he repeated, his voice hollow. You're someone who could lie to my face for weeks. Someone who could wear my grandmother's ring and sleep in my house and attend parties as my fiancée. All while knowing it was built on deception. I tried to tell you so many times. I started to, but then you'd look at me, or touch me, or say something that made me believe maybe it didn't matter. Maybe we could find a way to make it work. Make it work. Owen stood up abruptly, and I saw fury replacing the hurt in his eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? The announcement tonight was public. There are photographs, newspaper reports, and business deals that depended on this engagement. And now, I find out my fiancé is a complete fiction. I know I've ruined everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I couldn't let you marry me, thinking I was someone else. You deserve the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly. The truth is that I've been made a fool of. The truth is that I announced my engagement to a stranger tonight. The truth is that I told you I loved you, and you let me, knowing that everything between us was a lie. It wasn't a lie. My feelings weren't a lie. Your feelings were based on deception. Mine were based on deception. None of it was real, Emma. Hearing my real name in his voice should have been a relief, but instead it sounded like a curse. What happens now? Owen turned back to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Oh, you leave. Tonight I'll have Marcus drive you wherever you want to go. Back to Detroit, I assume? What about the engagement? The announcement? I'll handle it. I'll say there was a misunderstanding, that the engagement is off. People will gossip, but it will blow over eventually, and the real Stella Thompson. Contact her, explain that there was confusion with the arrangements. Perhaps we can still salvage something from this disaster. Each word felt like another nail in my coffin. He was already moving on, already planning a future that didn't include me. I'll pack my things, I whispered. Leave the ring, he said without turning around. I looked down at Eleanor's emerald, still glittering on my finger like a beautiful lie. With trembling hands, I slipped it off and placed it on his desk. The click of stone against wood sounded like a door closing forever. Owen, I said, reaching the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for falling in love with you. But for hurting you, you didn't deserve that. He didn't respond. Didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge that I'd spoken at all. I packed quickly, stuffing my few belongings into the designer luggage Owen had bought me. Everything felt tainted now, like evidence of my deception. The beautiful dresses, the jewelry, the life I'd lived for 3 precious weeks. All of it had to be left behind. Mrs. Patterson found me in the foyer, waiting for Marcus with my single suitcase. Oh, my dear, she said softly, taking in my tear-stained face. What's happened? I have to go, I managed. Not who you think I am. She studied my face for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She smiled. You're exactly who I thought you were, Emma. I stared at her in shock. You knew? I suspected from the beginning. The real Stella Thompson was supposed to arrive from London with specific belongings, letters from Eleanor, and photographs. Arrived with nothing but a soggy suitcase and the most honest eyes I'd seen in this house in years. Why didn't you say anything? Because I saw what you did for him. For the first time since his grandmother died, Owen smiled. He looked forward to coming home each evening, instead of burying himself in work until all hours. You brought him back to life, dear. Your name doesn't change that. But I lied to him, broke his trust. You made a mistake born of desperation, and then you tried to protect him from hurt. That's not the same as malicious deception. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. The car's ready, miss. As we drove through the gates of the Ashford estate, I pressed my face to the window one last time, memorizing every detail. The fountains, the manicured lawns, the mansion where I'd experienced the most intense 3 weeks of my life. Miss Emma, Marcus said quietly as we reached the highway. If I may say so, I've worked for the Ashford family for 15 years. I've never seen Master Owen as happy as he was these past weeks. He hates me now. He's hurt, there's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Marcus was quiet for a moment. It's the real Miss Thompson. She wrote to the house occasionally. Her letters were polite, proper, everything one would expect from a well-bred English lady, but they were cold, calculated. Nothing like the warmth you brought to that house. It doesn't matter now. Perhaps not. But love has a way of finding its way back, even when we think we've destroyed it completely. I didn't respond, couldn't respond around the knot in my throat. Outside the window, New York City blurred past in a stream of lights and possibilities, none of which included Owen Ashford. 6 months later, I was back in Detroit, working at a small art gallery downtown, living in a studio apartment that could fit inside Owen's closet. I'd seen the newspapers, the announcement that his engagement had been called off due to irreconcilable differences. There had been speculation, gossip, but Owen had weathered it with the same grace he brought to everything else. I'd also seen the announcement 2 months ago of his engagement to the real Stella Thompson. The photograph showed them at some charity function, looking perfectly matched, perfectly appropriate. It's perfectly empty. I was hanging a new exhibition when the gallery bell chimed. Without looking up from the painting I was adjusting, I called out, "We're closed, but you're welcome to look around." I was hoping to speak with the curator. My hands froze on the frame. I knew that voice, had heard it in my dreams every night. For 6 months, I turned slowly, and there he was. Owen Ashford, standing in my tiny gallery like he'd materialized from my imagination. He looked thinner, more tired, but still devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored coat. "Hello, Emma," he said softly. "Owen." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you, to talk. I saw the announcement about your engagement. Congratulations." His jaw tightened. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss." I called it off. My heart stopped. "What? 3 days ago?" "I couldn't go through with it." "But why?" "She's perfect for you. She's everything your grandmother wanted." "She's everything my grandmother wanted," he agreed. "She's not what I want." I gripped the edge of the nearest display case, afraid my legs might give out. "Owen, don't. Don't do this if you're just going to leave again." "I'm not leaving." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his green eyes. "I spent 6 months trying to hate you, trying to convince myself that what we had was built on lies. But the truth is, Emma, you showed me who you really were every single day. Your kindness to Mrs. Patterson, your genuine interest in art, and the way you stood up to Charles Harrington about making art accessible to everyone. Your courage in telling me the truth when you could have kept living the lie. That was all you. That was all real. I broke your trust. You made a mistake. A mistake. Born of desperation and fear, not malice. And then you corrected it, even knowing it would cost you everything." Tears were streaming down my face now. "I missed you. God, Owen, I missed you so much. I missed you too. Every day. Every night. I missed Emma Hayes much more than I ever cared about Stella Thompson. But your grandmother's will, the requirements, I found a loophole. The will specified that I needed to be engaged and married within the time frame, but it didn't specify to whom. My lawyers confirmed that as long as I fulfilled the basic requirements, the trust remains intact. You'd risk your inheritance for me, Emma?" He reached out and cupped my face in his hands. "I'd risk everything for you. I love you. Not Stella Thompson, not some fictional fiancé, but you. Emma Hayes from Detroit, who works in art galleries and names her plants Rodrigo, and makes terrible decisions that somehow work out in the end. I love you too, I whispered. I never stopped loving you. Then marry me. Not as part of some arrangement or business deal, but because we choose each other. Because what we have is real. Not a life built on lies or deception, but something honest and true and more beautiful than anything I'd ever dared to imagine. Yes, I said. And his mouth was on mine before the word had fully left my lips. We were married 3 months. Later, in a small ceremony in the garden of the Ashford estate, Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire service. Marcus smiled more than I'd ever seen him smile. And Owen, my Owen, looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his world, because this time, it wasn't pretending. This time, it was real. The end asterisk, like this video, if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers,